Let's dive into some ethics about funeral directors and embalmers. So, what ethical legislations do funeral directors adhere to? As confirmed by our interviewee, there are a couple of ethical considerations that funeral directors must look at. So, in Alberta, we have the Funeral Service Regulatory Board, and within that, there is a pretty much whole collection of individuals to deal with any complaints, and they follow the Funeral Service Act, which we can see on the side right here, and we'll talk a bit more about what is included in that as well. However, for the whole of Canada, there is a Funeral Association of Canada, which they can also refer to and which also highlights some policies and ethics as well. By taking a quick look at the glossary, we can note what kind of ethical considerations directors and embalmers must look at. Firstly, there's a list of the education that they need, which includes the amount of licensing, education, as well as the expiry date. And if we look further down, there are some business regulations as well. And lastly, there is a specific section for embalmers. So they have their own ethical set of instructions within the Funeral Service Act. Embalmer guidelines pretty much note that there must be a separate embalming room and that they must have their own separate ethical guidelines, which are designated by OH&S. Although there are multiple regulations for funeral directors, our interviewee noted that she values disenfranchised grief as a way to practice these regulations in person. As a funeral director, she mentioned that disenfranchised grief involves really understanding what other rituals people perform, how she can provide resources and space for them to do that, while also being able to communicate and understand their needs. Information about the regulatory board, as well as their personal theories around how they deal with grief in practice, has been really helpful in allowing us to look at how the new legal limitations around COVID 19 affect their current workplace and how this affects their services and their clientele as well. Increased wait time is one of the most noteworthy things that we heard our interviewee talk about. So, our increased wait times are influenced by the amount of documents needed, the amount of time it now takes to get those documents set off, notarized, which is all due to an increased workload. So, there's a lot more documents needed, there's a lot more of them giving off and distributed. That means there's a lot more of them needing to be approved. So, overall, that is something that has been a conflict. And then also, there's decreased attendance within the services, which does cause some service dissatisfaction as it doesn't allow for some rituals to happen in a timely manner or with enough people. So, overall, this causes a lot of worker overwhelm within the practice. This interview allowed us to look into how this population is dealing with grief. And this was really helpful because we were able to look at what current issues are going on within the funeral director community, I would say. And it as well gives us some idea of what's going on within the families during those funeral services as well. So, from the information that we've been given, we can see that a lot of this stress has been caused due to the pandemic. And I would say that there's a couple things as counselors that we could look at to help out our clients that might be funeral directors or that might also be coming into our practice with some issues pertaining to the COVID regulations that might be hindering their ability to practice certain rituals. As counselors, we could kind of look at other resources we could provide these individuals with who are experiencing a lot of this overwhelm at work, especially in this industry. So, we could say that this is more of a psychological hazard within their workplace. And we could kind of looking at getting that assessed for them, but just by giving this resource and information. And it definitely does seem like there's an increase in workload for them that is making it a lot more hard and stressful to do their job, given that these limitations legally make their client. Although suggesting OH&S could originally be a very good idea in this situation, it should be noted that the Canadian government has also noted some psychosocial considerations in relation to bereavement and grief support. So, the Canadian government notes some specific bereavement and grief support factors that are widely acknowledged within Canada overall. So, they kind of note that there's a need for psychosocial teams to work closely with funeral directors and with death related processes during this time in order for things to work a lot more smoothly and for the bereavement process to be a lot more facilitated. They also bring up the use of technology for funeral directors and how that can help a little bit more with the psychosocial factors that affect the process. Given all the legal and ethical requirements that we've gone through for funeral directors and embalmers, we can start to look at what role counselors can play within their own industry to help out these service individuals that are feeling really overwhelmed. Our interviewee provided us a lot of great information about what the funeral population and the bereavement workers are going through right now. Thus, I think it provided a lot of good information about what we could add to the current scope of research within grief counseling, specifically for this population. And it also gave us a lot of information about what could be useful in session with these clients. So, these resources that we got from our interview, and as well all the examples that she gave us, were really helpful in increasing our clinical competencies. So, this allowed us to learn a lot more about a diverse group of individuals and clientele that might come in, and we can learn how their work affects them. And this can be in relation to grief workers and also in relation to the clients that they serve.